Denys, it's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
So, Denys, aside from being a war analyst, you're also an airline pilot. So, I wanted to get your view. What happened with the Azeri civilian airliner that just crashed and it appears was shot down by Russia? What happened there?
Well, we have actually the clear evidence, and today Azerbaijani Airlines confirmed that it was the external factor. So they say it's the foreign object that entered the aircraft. We also have the evidence from the crash site that definitely there is the shrapnel on the tail part of the airplane. The debris look like rectangular, exactly the parts of the missiles which act upon explosion very close to the airplane. So that's how really the air defense missiles work. And before there was similar picture, there were similar pictures shared from Malaysian Airlines MH17, which was shut down over Ukraine. And also then Ukraine, the last year, shut down the Russian Sylvan's airplane Ilyushin 22, which miraculously landed in Anapa in one piece, but the trace and the images look pretty much the same. So, yes, obviously, before the official results of the investigation are released, we speculate about this. But as from my experience, from the images I saw, I may definitely state that the airplane was shot down by, in this case, the Russian air defense system. And I guess I already know what system. It was Panzer 1S, which recently was delivered to Chechnya. So the flight was conducted from Baku to Grozny. It's the regular flight. At the same morning, the same time, Russia launched the massive attack on Ukraine using their strategic bombers, Tupolev 95. That's why they closed the airspace over some territory of the Caspian Sea. And they also have the electronic warfare to jam the GPS signal. That's why for the flight radar 24, we don't have the ADS-B data, so GPS data basically, and the track of the airplane. So it's the mystery what Evolution's aircraft did in Grozny for average year, but obviously the data will be recorded because the flight data recorder already was uncovered from the scene, so it was picked up by investigation team and it will be decoded so they will know where the airplane located. But for us, so far, we don't know. So the weather in Grozny by the time was quite marginal because I checked out the ILS, the precision guidance system wasn't working. And because the GPS was jammed, the crew wasn't able to operate approaching air nav approach, which was pretty much good in this case. So the only option left for the crew was to approach via non-precision approach NDB system, and they didn't manage to do it. We already know that airplane did a couple of go-arounds. It was reported by passengers who survived, and after it, passengers reported a loud bang. Initially, the Russian media say that it was the bird strike, and I assume that pilots could think that probably it was the bird strike because what else could it be like in a worst nightmare? You wouldn't believe that you were hit by the Russian air defense missile. So maybe I think that there could be some of the conversation between the pilots about the bird strike. They might even report to the air traffic control about the bird strike. So we may find it in later on investigation reveal, but it's clearly not a bird strike because first of all, the holes were coming from the side to the airplane, from the port side to the starboard. So entrance, exit holes, those are 100% not the birds. I also heard that Russians are saying that it was the engine explosion, but the engines clearly on the video that we saw from the eyewitnesses, both of the engines were working, so they are not damaged on approach like it happened sometimes with United flight 232, as far as I remember. Then there was the turbine which just separated, causing the problems with flight controls. So here, Embraer 190 received just partial damage because Panzer's missile, it's not like the Buk missile, which Russia used in MH17 case, so it's not really big. So the airplane sustained damages, but it was able to continue. The specification of this Embraer 190 that it's a fly-by-wire airplane. It means that you don't have the direct mechanical linkage between your yoke and airfoil. So you basically put the signals to flight control computer, and then flight control computer sends its signal to the boosters, hydraulic boosters, which deflect the flight controls. But this system is quite vulnerable in those kind of the cases if you have, for example, damage to all of the three hydraulic systems, two main and one standby. If you lose hydraulic fluid, you cannot control the airplane. Basically, whatever you do with the steering doesn't matter. So the only option was left for pilots is to control the airplane manipulating with the engine's thrust. And that's why we see kind of strange evolutions of the airplane on the flight radar track. Then the airplane appeared in Kazakh airspace. There were also speculations, like I read in Reuters and Euronews article, that Russians forbidden the airplane to land in their airports, but apparently I think for now it's not correct. We have to wait for official results. So here we may say just about the evidence that the aircraft was definitely hit with object, with shrapnel, and I say that it's the Russian missile. But as for permissions to land or not, I would say for real investigation results, according to any sort of the aviation regulations, you are not forbidden to land in any sort of the airport if you declare Mayday, 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 emergency. So air traffic controller cannot forbid you from landing. But we know that everything might happen in Russia, right? But from the information I have, it was the decision of the crew to continue the flight and to divert to Aktau airport. So initially they wanted to fly over the sea. There was the case, by the way, with the same aircraft type, Embraer 190. Then after maintenance, technicians misconnected the flight control, so flight crew couldn't control airplane properly. It happened, I think, near Portugal or Spain, as far as I remember. So similar case, but their flight crew, at least they were able to control airplane in some way. So they went to the sea, and here they completely lost control. So it was logical to go to the sea, and Aktau actually was a nice spot to land in this case, calculating all the circumstances, because near Grozny and Makhachkala as alternate, there are lots of the mountains, lots of the different elevation terrain. In Aktau, terrain is pretty much flat, and pilots decided to go there. And also, the Aktau area is not that populated as, for example, Baku. So in case they had returned back to Baku, they would cause tremendous damage to the ground facilities, buildings, civilians on the ground. So obviously it was a good decision from the crew to go to Aktau, obviously. I think from my perspective, it was a good decision.
So you described this as having similarities to the famous crash in 1989 of United Airlines Flight 232, which crashed in Sioux City in the United States. Now, in that case, as you observed, it was about the hydraulics giving out. What do the hydraulics do, and why is that so important? And how does this all affect how the crash occurred the way that it occurred?
Well, yes, it's kind of the similarity. The difference is that it was the internal explosion in case of the United flight, and here we have imploded, so it's implosion of the debris of the missile. Case is similar in a way that pilots in both of the cases had to manipulate with the remaining tool they have, and the only tool is manipulating with the thrust of the engines, so basically increase thrust on one to turn, decrease on the other one. So you increase thrust on both engines because they're located under the wing to create the pitch moment up, so to cause the aircraft to climb. But it's very, very difficult to fly this aircraft in that case. And as pilots, I may tell that we are not trained for that on the flight simulators. But since this occurred at least for the second time, I think that the training, after all, should be done for airline pilots to fly at least once in 3 years. The training should be done to try to land the airplane even in those terrible conditions. So in the United 232, they were lucky at least that part of the passengers survived, the most part. And here, in case of Azerbaijani Embraer, also as far as we know, at least 28 people survived, including some of the crew members, but unfortunately, flight crews of the pilots lost their lives. So hydraulic is essential, and modern day aircraft, they all built according to mostly fly-by-wire scheme. So as I told you, in case you lose hydraulic, you don't have the direct mechanical linkage. As I mentioned, the Russian old airplane made in 50s, they had mechanical linkage, so no hydraulic was installed on the airplane. By the way, I used to fly Boeing 737, and there is a little different. So you have hydraulic, but in case you lose hydraulic system, you still may manipulate with airfoil, so control the airplane. It will be very hard, but you can still do it. Like you don't have the fly-by-wire system. And I think in a way, in this case, if it was Boeing 737, they wouldn't crash land. But, the aviation goes to minimize the weight and everything, and modern technologies, they step into the aviation. So fly-by-wire is really a modern technology. And, those designers who designed the aircraft, they never think that the aircraft would be hit by missile. Then they designed those. So basically, it's a no-go scenario for commercial aviation.
So, as you observed, this is not the first time that Russia has shot down a civilian airliner. This time around, we see that Russia is saying very, very little. But historically, how has that played out? How has Russia reacted when it's done something like shoot down a civilian airliner? Does it usually confess to it in the end, or does it just keep silent?
It keeps silent with this case, and it kept silent and continued to keep silent, accusing Ukrainian side and West about MH17. Even though we have the result already of the investigation that Russia shut down that airplane, it was their book, it was confirmed but by everything, by intelligence, by eyewitnesses, but still they cannot say that, okay, it was us. Maybe I think that they've shut down it by mistake, as well as this Embraer. I don't think that it's really profitable for Russia to have this appearance as some sort of the state which shut down some of the airplanes, civilian ones. So it's not a good reputation after all. But for them, it's hard to admit. I think because Russian regime, it has huge ambitions and it doesn't want to be involved in everything wrongdoing, like to show to the world and first of all to its own population that we are the bad guys. But in fact, if you check out the Russian military channels, like more or less, I wouldn't say independent that military bloggers, but those who do not afraid to say the things as they are. So Russian military channels, they say that the most probable scenario is that the Russian air defense shut down this airplane. But again, they blame Ukrainian side for it because by the time of the strike, Ukraine also sent some of the drones to hit Grozny. And it's a responsibility actually of the Russian side to close the commercial airfield. I think it's nonsense. Then your city town is under attack and you receive the commercial airplane, commercial flight. At the same time that in this kind of close airspace, you have the air defense in operation. So it's the usual Russian attitude, their management, how they deal with this situation. So shut down commercial traffic is by mistake, it's the normal thing. Recently some of their oil tankers sank in a Kerch Bay, not far away from Kerch, spilling lots of the oil. So again, it shows the attitude of Russia. It was the stormy weather, so why they even were there by the time of the storm, why the ships were so old. So it was mistake by mistake and negligence, let's say, of the common sense, which Russia also has in the case. Then they use military. So I wouldn't recommend actually to fly to Russia or cross the Russian airspace, because Russia is in a war state against the neighbor, against Ukraine. And the most airfields in Russia, they are common use by commercial airlines, yeah, and military. And Ukraine has the right to hit the Russian military infrastructure in a response. Then Russia uses its aviation military to hit Ukraine, and there can bring some of the unforeseen circumstances. And we know that Kazakh Airlines and Azerbaijani Airlines already canceled many of the flights to the cities which are not far away from the Ukrainian border, including Caucasus cities of Chechnya, Grozny, Makhachkala. So they will not fly uh, to that point still now. But every city and every military infrastructure object might be hit in Russia by Ukraine, because Russia, first of all, started this war.
So, Denys, we see that Russia is not taking responsibility for its actions, but we see that Russia does that a lot. Look at the war in Ukraine. They don't take responsibility for the fact that they've started a war of aggression for no reason. Likewise, they have not taken responsibility for the other airplanes they've shot down, such as MH17. But why is that? Why does Russia not accept responsibility for the grave crimes that it's committing globally?
They did because they didn't have responsibility before. Then they occupied Crimea. It was okay for them. Then they started the war in Donbass. Just minor sanctions were applied. So Russian regime feels pretty much okay with the crimes they commit. They're still in United Nations. They're still supported by some of the countries they trade with their oil, gas. Like there are some, let's say, neutral countries which continue to buy the Russian fossil fuels. So the Russian economy still has some of the income, and the Russian regime feels that, as average, whatever they do, they will be there. They will be respected by some part of the globe. And unfortunately, there are also some of the forces in the West that think, okay, it's better maybe to deal with Putin, or, to see from the other perspective, from the different way. But I don't think it's a good thing. Actually, if you commit the crime like Russia did in Ukraine, for example, there should be punishment. Otherwise, we're gonna face with circumstances that occurred with Azerbaijani aircraft. So they simply don't have any borders now. They may do whatever they want. They may tell whatever they want, and there will be no any punishment and circumstances, unfortunately. Mainly because Russia, like, it lost the vast part of its army in Ukraine. It is busy in Ukraine. They have the crisis with the army men, but what they have still is nuclear weaponry. So, Putin and Russian lead, they all say about nuclear weaponry. That's probably the only thing that makes them strong, and that's it. So they may do whatever they want. That's the reality of our world, unfortunately. So from my perspective, I think the rest of the countries also should unite in applying the sanctions on Russia to be more hard on them, and maybe that might force them to think.
Denys, that was really a fantastic analysis. I really appreciate your time today.